When you hear the word witch, what comes to mind? A pointy black hat, a bubbling cauldron, a woman flying on a broomstick. These images are super familiar, but the real story of witchcraft is way more complex, fascinating, and honestly, pretty tragic. Today, we're peeling back the layers of myth to uncover the real history of witches. Let's dive in. The idea of people with magical powers has been around for thousands of years. In ancient Greece and Rome, magic was a part of everyday life. People would visit oracles for prophecies or buy amulets to ward off bad luck. But here's the thing, it wasn't always seen as evil. There was good magic, used for healing or protection, and bad magic, used to curse people. The line was blurry, but it wasn't yet tied to devil worship or anything like that. The focus was more on the intent of the magic, not some grand cosmic battle of good versus evil. So when did everything change? The big shift happened in medieval Europe. As Christianity spread, the church started to take a much harder line on any beliefs or practices outside its own teachings. Anything that wasn't officially sanctioned by the church, including old folk traditions and remedies, began to be viewed with suspicion. This is where the idea of heresy comes in, the crime of holding beliefs that went against official church doctrine. Initially, the church was actually a bit skeptical about witches. Some early theologians argued that the idea of people flying through the night or changing shape was just superstition. They thought it was nonsense, not a real threat. But over time, this view started to change dramatically. The late Middle Ages, from about the 14th to the 15th century, were a tough time in Europe. We're talking famine, plague like the Black Death, and constant warfare. People were scared, and they were looking for someone to blame. In this climate of fear and uncertainty, the idea of a secret enemy, a conspiracy of evildoers working with the devil, started to take hold. This is where the classic image of the witch as a devil worshipper really begins. A major turning point was the publication of a book in 1487 called the Malleus Maleficarum, which translates to the Hammer of Witches. This book was basically a witch hunting manual. It laid out, in terrifying detail, how to identify, prosecute, and punish witches. It claimed that witchcraft was real, that witches made pacts with the devil, and that they were a massive threat to society. The Malleus Maleficarum was a bestseller of its time, thanks to the new printing press, and it spread like wildfire across Europe, pouring fuel on the flames of the witch craze. The book was also deeply misogynistic. It argued that women were more susceptible to the devil's temptations because they were weaker, more impressionable, and more carnal than men. This is a huge reason why the vast majority of people accused of witchcraft, somewhere between 75 to 85%, were women. So, who were these accused witches? Were they actually practicing magic? The short answer is, mostly no. The people accused were often those on the margins of society. They were poor, elderly women, especially widows who lived alone. They were midwives or herbalists whose knowledge of natural remedies was suddenly seen as suspicious. They were people who were just a little bit different, who didn't fit in, or who had personal disputes with their neighbors. A crop failure, a sick cow, a sudden illness, all of these could lead to an accusation of witchcraft against a neighbor you had a grudge against. The witch trials themselves were horrifying. Accused individuals were often subjected to brutal torture to extract a confession. Sleep deprivation, starvation, and horrific physical devices were used until the person confessed to whatever their accusers wanted to hear. They would confess to flying to secret gatherings called sabbats, kissing the devil, and casting evil spells. These confessions, obtained under duress, were then used as proof of their guilt. And to name other witches, creating a chain reaction of accusations and trials that could tear entire communities apart. One of the most infamous methods of proving someone was a witch was the swimming test. The accused would be tied up and thrown into a body of water. Since water was seen as a pure element that would reject evil, the logic was that if they floated, they were a witch and would be executed. If they sank, they were innocent. But they would often drown in the process. It was a no-win situation. The peak of the European witch hunts, known as the Burning Times, was from about 1560 to 1660. Tens of thousands of people, mostly women, were executed. While we often think of burning at the stake, hanging was actually the more common method of execution in many places, including England and its American colonies. Speaking of which, let us talk about the Salem witch trials in 1692. This is probably the most famous example in American history. but it was actually a late and relatively small-scale event compared to the European craze. It all started in Salem Village, Massachusetts, when a group of young girls began exhibiting strange behaviors, screaming, contorting their bodies, and having fits. The local doctor couldn't find a physical cause, so he blamed witchcraft. The girls then started naming people they claimed were bewitching them, starting with 3 marginalized women: Tituba, an enslaved woman; Sarah Good, a homeless beggar; and Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman involved in property disputes. Under intense pressure, Tituba confessed, telling a fantastical story about signing the devil's book. This sparked a mass hysteria that gripped the entire community. Over the next year, more than 200 people were accused, and 19 were hanged. One elderly man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death with heavy stones for refusing to enter a plea. What caused the Salem hysteria? Historians have a few theories. It was likely a combination of factors: genuine religious fervor and belief in the devil's, social tensions between different factions in the village, a recent smallpox epidemic, and even the possibility of a fungus called ergot that can grow on rye bread and cause hallucinations and muscle spasms. It was a perfect storm of fear, suspicion, and social pressure. So, when did the witch hunts end? By the 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment was beginning. There was a growing emphasis on reason, science, and rational thought. The legal systems became more standardized, and courts started demanding more concrete evidence. The idea of spectral evidence, where someone could claim a witch's spirit attacked them in a dream, was increasingly rejected. The belief in magic didn't just disappear overnight, but the state-sponsored persecution of witches largely came to an end. But the story of witchcraft doesn't end there. In the 20th century, there was a major revival of witchcraft, but in a completely new form. This is the birth of modern paganism and Wicca. In the 1950s, an English civil servant named Gerald Gardner introduced Wicca to the public. He claimed to have been initiated into a surviving, pre-Christian witch cult, though many historians dispute this. Regardless of its origins, Wicca is a nature-based religion that has nothing to do with the devil or evil. Wiccans often worship a god and a goddess, celebrate the changing seasons, and practice magic for positive goals like healing, protection, and personal growth. A central tenet of Wicca is the Wiccan Rede, which states, "And it harm none, do what ye will." This emphasizes personal responsibility and ethical behavior. For modern witches, it's a spiritual path focused on empowerment, connection to nature, and self-discovery. So, the next time you see a Halloween witch with a pointy hat and a green face, remember the long and complicated history behind that image. It's a story of ancient beliefs, social panic, tragic injustice, and ultimately, modern spiritual revival. It reminds us of the dangers of mass hysteria and scapegoating, and how easily fear can turn neighbor against neighbor. But it's also a story of resilience and how ancient traditions can be rediscovered and reimagined in a positive, life-affirming way. The history of witchcraft is a powerful lens through which we can view our own history, with all its light and its shadows. It's a journey from ancient folk magic through a dark period of persecution to a modern spiritual path celebrated by many today. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the real history of witches. If you found this fascinating, hit that like button and subscribe for more journeys into the hidden corners of history. Let me know in the comments what piece of this history surprised you the most. See you next time.